My friends, it is UnderdogFantasy.com. The NBA playoffs are here, and the Underdog is the place to play if you're a fan looking to cash in on all your favorite players' performances. Available in over 30 states, including California, Missouri, and Texas. Just pick higher or lower on 2 or more players' stats for a shot to win real money. Underdog just dropped their playoff basketball promo. You can play your way to increasingly bigger boosts each round of the playoffs. Start a playoff series by using your Game 1 boost and continue boosting each following game to unlock the next one. The longer the series, the bigger the boosts. Use promo code TIM and get up to $1,000 in bonus credits when you make your first deposit. Download the app today. Turn every bucket into a win with Underdog. Shout out Underdog. Thanks for sponsoring the show. And my friends, play responsibly. Games are awesome. I love games. And Underdog is fantastic. But, have fun, but be responsible. From the New York Post, holy crap, it's starting, my friends. Nellie Orr, Justice Department official's wife, perjured herself with demonstrably false Trump-Russia testimony, bombshell FBI records. I just want to say right off the bat, the New York Post is leading with this as a demonstrably true statement. Okay, this is a headline where they're opening themselves up to liability for pointing this out, but they're saying, hey, don't look at me. FBI records are pointing this out. This is in the news now as a fact. Okay, the person who compiled smears and lies against Donald Trump, which basically ramped up the Russia hoax, which was used to stop Donald Trump, even a component of his impeachment. This person was lying. According to these documents, the wife of former DOJ official gave demonstrably false testimony to Congress about her involvement in drafting and disseminating since debunked dossiers about Trump's purported collusion with Russia in 2016, according to a bombshell trove of internal FBI records released by Senator Chuck Grassley. Nellie Orr worked with the research firm Fusion GPS when it was hired in the lead up to the 2016 election to dig up dirt on the Trump campaign's alleged links to Russian organized crime, but later told a House panel she did not know about the DOJ's panel investigation into the matter. Now, I want to jump straight to Chuck Grassley, grassley.senate.gov. Newly declassified FBI documents proves Fusion GPS contractor Nellie Orr lied to Congress about contributions to Crossfire Hurricane. Quote, by lying to Congress, Nellie Orr showed contempt for congressional oversight and the American people. What's more, the FBI and DOJ's failure to hold Orr accountable for appearing to commit multiple felonies and its obstructive conduct against agents that sought additional information reveals the agency's deeply disturbing political bias. Orr never suffered consequences for advancing the phony Trump-Russia narrative and attempting to cover up her involvement in the hoax. Yet time and again, the American justice system has been weaponized against President Trump and his associates with reckless abandon. The DOJ's inaction on Nellie Orr's criminal referral, despite the obviously incriminating evidence provided in the FBI's own analysis, undermines public trust in the rule of law. I applaud Director Patel, Attorney General Bondi, and Deputy Attorney General Blanche for cooperating with my request to declassify this information, which is in the public's interest, and chart a new course for transparency and accountability at the FBI and DOJ. Here's a challenge for the American people right now. We are talking about 10 years ago when this is all kicking off. Between 9 and 10 years ago, depending on how reductive you want to get. There are many young people we've had on this show who were not politically active nor paying attention when this was going down. And they only know Trump for who he is today, not what was done to conspire against him. I would say soft coup, they didn't take over the government necessarily. They didn't go in with guns and remove Trump from office, but they did try to impeach him. They used this as evidence of his illicit activities, claiming that the Ukraine impeachment was motivated by his ties to Russia. They perpetuated this for years. And their goal, I would argue, is easily defined as sedition. And who is they? Democrats, Republicans, and members of our own intelligence agencies. Yeah,
establishment figures all around. Please go ahead.
No, it's just really ironic that right now you have an entire class of individuals, those on the media and the Democratic left, who are losing their minds over these individuals being fired in the bureaucratic administration, who did exactly what Trump said that they did, that they spent his entire first administration blocking every action that he did, hamstringing every single thing that his administration brought forward. And for what? just to make up some kind of phony story about Russian dancers in urine to suggest that Trump was somehow in with the Russian mob because they didn't like that Trump might come in and wreck the gravy train. It was all true the entire time.
I think that's worth pointing to. I think the average person, when they hear about the Russia story, there's so many people that have talked about Trump's involvement with Russia. They lose sight of the fact that it was actually the accusation was that Trump was involved with the Russian mafia, not that Trump was actually working for Russia, right, for the government of Russia. And that's one of the things that, to be honest with you, I hadn't been cognizant of until I was reading through this, the post on Chuck Grassley's site, is the fact that it was a connection, or it was alleged that he had a connection to the Russian mafia, not that he was an agent of Putin. And now it's transformed into in the most ridiculous sense. People were saying that he was a KGB agent back in the 80s.
Yeah,
and
his
he was
code
a sleeper.
name.
Yeah, and he had a code name and stuff, which is obviously completely ridiculous. But it points to how these stories got blown completely out of proportion. That went from literally nothing, fabricated by an Oppo research company, and turned into he's a Russian agent, and it's actually stuck on the left. The left genuinely believes that he is or has some kind of connection to the Russian government.
And what is it, in the 90s, one of his companies did a deal with some Russian landowner to make a hotel somewhere. It turned out that guy's brother was in the Russian mob. Is that like the connection that they're talking about?
No, this is the Crossfire Hurricane and the stuff. The Steele dossier, that was totally fabricated. Like, there was
they
nothing.
suggested that somehow the Russian mafia had gotten some blackmail on Trump with some secret tapes, and that there was this kind of
P tapes, remember?
Yeah, that kind of nonsense. But that's not even the craziness of that is not the point. The point is that they used this to completely freeze and hamstring every single law enforcement agency in this country. We don't even know what reports or referrals made it to whom. That shouldn't be happening. This isn't 1925 where you hand the kid a folder and run this down to the chief.
Yep.
No, you send the referral directly. Who knew what?
It got intercepted, didn't it?
I mean, that's on the table.
Or Bill Barr saw it and just was like, let's just pretend that doesn't exist.
I wouldn't be surprised if Bill Barr was like, I wonder if I'm going to be generous, his attitude was, wow, this is really bad, but let's de-escalate things and just put a stop to it now.
Let's not get too hasty kind of a thing?
Well, no, more like these people should go to jail because what they did is very criminal. However, that could lead to escalation politically and destabilization. So let's just stop where we are. He seemed like the kind of guy who's going to be like, now there, guys, like most Republicans.
Right.
The traditional Republicans being like, slow down there, Democrats. Bill Barr sees and he goes, oof. That's a lot of work to deal with, and it's going to create a historical political firestorm. So let's just, everybody, we'll call it a bad hair day, go about our business. I think that's plausible. Bill Barr was like, I don't want to do this because it's hard, it's big.
And then it starts implicating anybody that's perjured themselves, which is like James Clapper saying that he didn't.
Homie? All of them.
Yeah.
Christopher Wray, especially. I mean, we already have Christopher Wray on the record for lying over how and when he met with Joe Biden.
And take a look at how the Supreme Court handles these epic cases. And I mean epic as in like grandiose historical moments. Texas v. Pennsylvania in the 2020 election. What does the Supreme Court say? But I don't wanna. So they say no. It is the obligation of the Supreme Court to handle lawsuits at the state level in what's called original jurisdiction. Now, that's my opinion. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm sure there'll be legal scholars saying Tim Pool's wrong. Supreme Court can take what they want.
It's going to be a great Newsweek article.
Yeah.
Indeed. My point is, who do the states go to for adjudication in affairs if the Supreme Court says no? And this is my point. Not to rehash all these old stories, but in the 2020 election case, questioning the validity of how judges and governors changed election rules in violation of, I believe it's Article 1 of the Constitution, or it's Article 1, I think, in violation of the Constitution, how the states have the right to handle, state legislatures handle their election rules. The Supreme Court said, we're not going to hear it. It is typical of the establishment conservative regime to say, stop, we don't want to have to do this. Whereas Democrats are like, turn on the steamroller and pedal to the metal.
And they even found, again, they would take federal cases in the case of Letitia James with Trump. They would take federal statutes, multiply them by 34, and then charge them at the state level with Trump. But you have Republican governors who, again, take what you described as kind of the Bill Barr, well, let's not get too hasty. Let's just simmer down. We'll just move forward. You even saw this with Representative McIver, right? The Trump DOJ suggested from that attorney from Newark that they were going to move forward if she wanted to move forward, maybe just apologize, and they refused to. So now Trump's administration is saying, all right, fine. You don't want to move forward? All right, let's get out the boxing gloves.
I want to make sure people understand the psychosis that this country has been going through for some time. It's hard to think about it, but the COVID lockdowns were 5 years ago.
Yeah.
5 years ago, this nation went insane. Mm-hmm. Now, hold on. 5 years before that, this country went insane.
Yes,
too.
2015.
This is when, let me play for this video. This video is from 2018. Listen to this. Let me turn the volume up. And
what would that 20% alternative really mean? So that's part of what I'm doing with this, with aspects of this piece, like this trip to Moscow. You know, what would it mean if it really went that deep? Now, there's a lot of ways in which this scandal could be really bad and not go that deep. But I think you need to consider that for another reason, which is that everyone always says, well, this has been Trump's view forever. All this stuff he's saying about the Western allies splitting us apart from the West.
Let's go back. This is a long thing. I don't want to play the full thing. But it says in the Chiron, unlikely but possible that Trump has been a Russian intel asset since 1987. And so
you could say that about any human being on Earth.
The election,
possible.
Kind of leverage over Donald Trump. In a new cover story from New York Magazine, writer Jonathan Chait argues, we have not allowed ourselves to consider the full range of possibilities. Chait lays out what could be considered the worst-case scenario for Trump-Russia collusion, that Donald Trump has been a Russian intelligence asset since 1987.
That would mean Donald Trump is a Soviet agent, not a Russian asset. That's how insane this was back then. This was the pretext by which Trump had, what was it, Michael Flynn prosecuted or persecuted is probably a better word, for communicating with Russians, lying to the FBI, they said. They were going after anybody who was going to work with Trump, and they used this as pretext, that Trump was an asset of Russia and that all of this communication was illegal, illicit, or otherwise, when it wasn't.
It was like 2015. I was watching a lot of Rachel Maddow, living in L.A., still doing that post-liberal lifestyle, clinging on. And I just remember all of a sudden they started talking about Russia. And I'm like, what the fuck? We haven't talked about Russia in 20 years. Like, Russia and the U.S. are allies now. We're done with it. And 2015, the propaganda started talking Russia. And then it was not only the perfect storm because they're creeping up on Russia with, NATO up in Ukraine. They want to control it. They want Russia to make the first move so they can have this global war and take it over. Not only that, now they get to pin it on the president, the guy who's running for president. Like, ooh, we can use this to our advantage. Not only are we propagandizing people to go to war with Russia, we can scare people into fearing Trump.
This is 2000. You're talking about 2015.
Yeah.
Well, not 3 years before that was when Mitt Romney and Barack Obama had their debate, and Barack Obama said that when Mitt Romney was saying that Russia was our greatest geopolitical foe, Barack Obama said, the 80s called and they want their foreign policy back. 3 years before that.
It was so abrupt when they started the Russian crap. It was so weird and manufactured.
Because of Ukraine, because of Crimea. This has been in the works for a long time. And what's fascinating is how predictable a lot of it is. Because if you go back to 2010s, 2012 with the Arab Spring, something I harp on about quite a bit is the Qatar-Turkey pipeline, and that's because it's not the beginning, but it is if you go back to this point, obviously everything can be reduced back to some 1,000 years ago something happened. But the Qatar-Turkey pipeline wasn't implemented because Syria blocked us. They said they're not going to allow us to build this pipeline. They're allies with Russia. The U.S. gets mad at Russia. Russia says you're not going to be able to do this. Then starts working with Syria and Iran to build the same pipeline, tapping a natural gas field to once again to strengthen the Gazprom gas control that they have in Europe. The U.S. gets pissed, and then they say, okay, Burisma, energy company in Ukraine, we're going to try and control the flow of energy through Ukraine as another means to get the prices of energy down in Europe because Russia's charging too much. What happens? Crimea. U.S. involvement in Ukraine, Russia and the U.S. or the West are fighting over whether Ukraine's going to join the West or join the Russian the Trade Federation. And then, of course, we enter the cusp of war, and the U.S. goes, okay, Russia's our enemy now. And that's the direction we went.
Just, sorry, a little ironic history point here that I think people really fail to point out. You talk about the Arab Spring, you talk about the pipeline. This all comes from the United States rebuilding the world after World War II with the Marshall Plan. And the Soviet plan was to create a major energy economy to undermine the United States. So in essence, what this has all turned out to be is a scheme of the Soviets to undermine the U.S. by creating an alternate energy sphere that cuts off the United States from deciding what the globe does, because that's what we earned in World War II. Now we have this situation where the Soviets do kind of get the last laugh, creating this endless trail of corruption over an energy market and fundamentalist terrorism. There you go, a little history lesson for you there.
I want to say one quick thing before we jump to the next segment on this one, because we have a super chat where Jonathan Westcott says it's not a soft coup as much as it's a blatant attempted coup. Just because it wasn't successful doesn't mean it isn't an attempted coup. This is the issue. When we were discussing this before the show, the issue is that it was successful. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump wasn't reelected. He was unable to effectively run the government the way he wanted to, run the executive branch the way he wanted to. His national security advisor is falsely accused of crime. Papadopoulos, Carter Page, falsely accused of crimes. They even they arrested the lawyer and charged him over fabricating evidence against Carter Page. They knew that. I don't want to get into the weeds on this. There's so much to break down. But they fabricated evidence by altering an email so that Carter Page looked like he was guilty of a crime when he was actually intentionally he was working with the CIA and providing them information.
Right.
This is what they consistently had done to make sure that any time Trump would turn around, he'd be weighed down and unable to actually implement the foreign policy he wanted to. And then the one time they claimed he was presidential.
I tend to look at the coup.
When he bombed Syria.
When he bombed Syria. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.